The first gunshot echoed across the Wyoming prairie as Rebecca Mills tumbled from her saddle, her horse bolting into the twilight. Blood seeped from her arm as she scrambled behind a fallen log, heart hammering against her ribs. The stagecoach robbery had gone terribly wrong, not that she'd been part of it. She'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, a schoolteacher traveling west to start a new life, now caught in the crossfire between bandits and lawmen. Wyoming Territory, 1878. The land was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, and Rebecca found herself alone as night fell, miles from the nearest town. Her valise had disappeared with her horse, along with most of her worldly possessions. All she had left was the clothes on her back, a small pouch of coins sewn into her petticoat, and a bleeding arm that needed attention. She stumbled through the growing darkness, following what appeared to be a trail, though in the dimming light she couldn't be certain. The temperature dropped rapidly as night settled fully across the prairie. Rebecca gathered what dry wood she could find, arranged it into a small pile, and reached for the matches she normally kept in her pocket only to find them gone. "Fool," she muttered to herself, teeth beginning to chatter. Without fire, without blanket, without shelter, the night would be dangerous. Rebecca huddled against a boulder that still held some of the day's warmth, cradling her injured arm. She'd torn a strip from her petticoat to bandage it, but blood still seeped through. Exhaustion pulled at her eyelids, and despite her determination to stay alert, sleep claimed her. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats, didn't sense the tall figure dismounting, didn't feel the first gentle touch as calloused fingers checked her pulse. It wasn't until warmth suddenly enveloped her that Rebecca's eyes fluttered open, disoriented and afraid. "Easy now, miss. You're safe." The deep voice came from above her, and Rebecca found herself looking up into the most striking pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a man kneeling beside her, his face partially hidden by the shadow of his hat brim. What she could see was weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of stubble covering a strong jaw. Who she began, then noticed the heavy coat now draped over her body, the fire crackling cheerfully where her failed attempt had been, and the steaming cup being offered to her. "Name's Kieran Vance," he said, helping her sit up against the boulder. "Trail boss for the Lazy S Ranch. Found you half frozen beside a cold fire pit." His eyes flickered to her bandaged arm. "Looks like you've had yourself quite a day." Rebecca took the tin cup, grateful for its warmth against her palms. "Rebecca Mills," she replied, wincing as she shifted position. "I was on my way to Sweetwater. There was a robbery, the stagecoach, and shooting. I was caught in it." Kieran nodded, his expression grave. "Been hearing about a gang hitting the stages lately." He gestured to her arm. "Mind if I take a look at that? Got some experience patching up cowboys." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. No sense in false modesty when infection could kill her. She watched as he unwrapped her makeshift bandage with surprisingly gentle hands, his movements efficient. "Bullet just grazed you," he said after examining the wound. "Lucky." From his saddlebag, he produced a small flask and a clean cloth. "This'll sting." Rebecca bit back a cry as he cleaned the wound with what smelled like whiskey, then applied a proper bandage from his supplies. The entire time, his expression remained focused, his touch professional but kind. "Thank you," she said when he finished. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Kieran sat back on his heels, studying her face in the firelight. "What brings a lady like yourself out to Wyoming Territory? Sweetwater ain't exactly Paris, France." Rebecca sipped the coffee he'd given her, strong and black, but wonderfully warming. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher. They advertised back east for someone with proper education." "Schoolteacher," he repeated, a slight smile touching his lips. "Town's been needing one. Last fellow lasted 6 months before heading back east, claiming our children were wilder than coyotes." "Are they?" Rebecca asked, finding herself returning his smile despite her circumstances. Kieran chuckled, a rich sound that seemed to warm her as much as the coffee. "Only on their good days." He added more wood to the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. "We'll camp here tonight. Come morning, I'll get you to Sweetwater." "I couldn't impose, Miss Mills," he interrupted gently. "There's 40 miles of rough country between here and town. You're hurt, horseless, and this territory ain't kind to lone travelers, especially not ladies from back east." Rebecca wanted to argue, to assert her independence, but practicality won out. You're right, of course, I'm in your debt, Mr. Vance. Kieran, he corrected, settling his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. Out here, formality don't last long. Kieran, she repeated, testing the name. It suited him somehow strong, but with an unexpected gentleness. Then you must call me Rebecca. He nodded, then removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Without the hat shadowing his features, she could see him properly a man perhaps 30 years old, with those remarkable blue eyes set in a face that spoke of years under open skies. Not conventionally handsome, perhaps, but compelling in a way that made it difficult for Rebecca to look away. You should get some sleep, he said, seemingly unaware of her scrutiny. Dawn comes early and we've got a long ride tomorrow. Rebecca settled back, pulling his coat closer around her. It smelled of leather, horses, and something else uniquely his. Aren't you cold without your coat? Kieran smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. Got my bedroll and I'm used to the cold, part of being a cowboy. As she drifted towards sleep, Rebecca heard him moving quietly around their small camp, checking his horse, adding more wood to the fire. She should have been frightened alone in the wilderness with a stranger, but something about Kieran Vance made her feel safer than she had in months. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was his low voice, almost a whisper. Rest easy, schoolteacher. I'll keep watch through the night. That's my vow to you. Morning came with the scent of coffee and bacon. Rebecca opened her eyes to find Kieran crouched by the fire, tending a small skillet. His coat was still draped over her, though he'd added his own blanket during the night as well. Good morning, he said without looking up. How's the arm feeling? Rebecca flexed it carefully. Sore but better. You're quite the cook for a cowboy. He glanced up then, the morning light catching in his eyes. One of the first things you learn on the trail, man can't work cattle on an empty stomach. He handed her a tin plate with bacon and what looked like biscuits. It ain't fancy, but it's filling. It's wonderful, Rebecca assured him after taking a bite. She couldn't remember when food had tasted so good. Perhaps it was the fresh air or simply her gratitude at being alive. As they ate, Kieran told her about Sweetwater. Town's growing fast, got about 500 souls now. General store, hotel, church, even a proper doctor, though he doubles as the undertaker, which some folks find unsettling. And the school? Rebecca asked. Small building on the edge of town, about 30 children ages 5 to 16. Some only come when their families ain't needing them for ranch work. He studied her over his coffee cup. Teaching them won't be easy, most have never had much schooling. Rebecca straightened her shoulders. I didn't come west expecting easy, Mr. Vance. Kieran, I came for the challenge. Something like respect flickered in his expression. What made you leave the east? Most women I know would rather go the other direction. Rebecca looked down at her plate. There wasn't much left for me there. My parents died of influenza 2 years ago. I taught at a ladies' seminary in Boston, but she hesitated. How could she explain the suffocating feeling of living someone else's life, of seeing her future mapped out in endless identical days? But it wasn't enough, Kieran finished for her. She looked up, surprised at his perception. Yes. Exactly. When I saw the advertisement for Sweetwater, it seemed like fate. Kieran nodded, not pressing further. He began packing up their small camp with efficient movements. We should get moving. Can you ride? Yes, though it's been some time. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. You'll ride with me. Shadow can carry us both. Shadow proved to be a magnificent black gelding with intelligent eyes and a gentle disposition despite his imposing size. Kieran helped Rebecca mount first, then swung up behind her. The arrangement was intimate by necessity, his chest against her back, his arms around her to hold the reins. Comfortable? He asked, his breath warm against her ear. Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. It had been years since she'd been this close to a man, and never to one like Kieran Vance. She could feel the strength in his body, solid and reassuring behind her. They rode through the morning, Kieran pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the territory. Rebecca found herself laughing at his tales of cattle drives and the antics of young cowboys. How did you become a trail boss so young? She asked as they paused to rest Shadow by a small stream. Kieran helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Started working cattle when I was 14. My pa died and there wasn't much choice. Worked my way up, saved my pay, learned everything I could. The lazy-ass owner, Mr. Sullivan, took a liking to me, been his trail boss for 5 years now. You must be good at what you do, he shrugged, but she caught the flash of pride in his eyes. I know cattle. Know men too, which is the harder part of the job. And women? Rebecca asked before she could stop herself. Kieran looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Women are a mystery I haven't had much time to study, he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Rebecca couldn't name but felt in the quickening of her pulse. Then Shadow snorted and pawed at the ground, breaking the spell. They continued riding, stopping briefly for a cold lunch of leftover biscuits and jerky. The landscape changed as they traveled, prairie giving way to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. By late afternoon, Rebecca could see smoke from chimneys in the distance. Sweetwater, Kieran announced. Home to the hopeful, the desperate, and a few folks just passing through. As they approached the town, Rebecca felt a flutter of nervousness. What awaited her here? Would the town accept her? Would the children learn from her? And what would happen after Kieran delivered her safely? Would she ever see him again? The main street of Sweetwater was wider than she expected, lined with wooden buildings in various states of newness. People paused in their activities to watch as Kieran rode in with Rebecca before him. She was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, her dress torn and dirty, her hair falling from its pins. Kieran seemed to sense her discomfort. Folks here don't judge by appearances, he murmured. They judge by what you bring to the community. He guided Shadow to a 2-story building with a sign reading Sweetwater Hotel and Dining. As they dismounted, a portly man with an impressive mustache hurried out. Kieran Vance, didn't expect to see you back from the North Range so soon. His curious gaze shifted to Rebecca. And who might this lady be, Mayor Thornton? This is Miss Rebecca Mills, your new schoolteacher, Kieran said formally. Had some trouble with bandits on the trail, lost her horse and belongings. The mayor's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Miss Mills, we've been expecting you. When you didn't arrive with yesterday's stage, we feared the worst. Are you injured? Just a minor wound, thanks to Mr. Vance's assistance, Rebecca said, attempting to look more composed than she felt. Well, we can't have our new teacher without proper accommodations. Martha. He called over his shoulder. A plump woman with kind eyes appeared in the doorway. This is Miss Mills, our schoolteacher. She'll need our best room and whatever else she requires. Martha bustled forward, clucking sympathetically at Rebecca's condition. You poor dear, come right in. We'll get you a hot bath and fresh clothes. My niece is about your size, you can borrow some things until we can get to the mercantile. Rebecca turned to Kieran, suddenly reluctant to part from him. I don't know how to thank you properly. No need, he said, his expression unreadable beneath his hat brim. Just doing what any man would. Few would have been so kind, she insisted, holding out his coat. You saved my life. Kieran took the coat, his fingers brushing hers. I'll check on you tomorrow, see how you're settling in. The promise lightened Rebecca's heart as Martha led her inside. The hotel was simple but clean, with polished wood floors and modest furnishings. The promised bath was heavenly, washing away dirt and fear alike. Martha's niece's clothes fit well enough, though the dress was plainer than Rebecca was accustomed to. That evening, she met many of Sweetwater's prominent citizens at dinner, all eager to welcome their new teacher. The town doctor examined her arm and pronounced Kieran's field treatment damn fine work, if you'll pardon my language, miss. Despite the warm welcome, Rebecca found her thoughts returning to Kieran throughout the evening. There was something about him that intrigued her, a depth beneath his quiet competence, a gentleness behind his strength. True to his word, Kieran appeared at the hotel the next morning as Rebecca was finishing breakfast. He'd shaved and changed his clothes, though he still wore the same well-worn hat. Miss Mills, he greeted her with a slight tip of his hat. Thought I might show you the schoolhouse if you're feeling up to it. Rebecca agreed eagerly, and they walked together down Sweetwater's main street. Kieran pointed out the various businesses, the general store, the blacksmith, the small church that doubled as a meeting hall. Town's growing, he explained. 2 years ago, half these buildings weren't here. Railroad's planning a spur line through next year, which will bring more folks. The schoolhouse stood on the edge of town, a simple one-room building with a small bell tower. Inside, rows of rough-hewn benches faced a teacher's desk on a raised platform. A blackboard covered most of one wall, and a pot-bellied stove stood in the corner. Rebecca walked slowly around the room, running her fingers over the desks, imagining the children who would soon fill the space with life and noise. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it despite the building's simplicity. Kieran leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "School term starts in 2 weeks, gives you time to settle in." "Will any of your Cowboy's children be attending?" she asked. A shadow crossed his face. "Don't have children of my own if that's what you're asking." I know what you meant," he said, his tone softening. "Some of the ranch hands have families. Their kids might come when they can." Rebecca nodded, wondering at his reaction. There was a story there, but she had no right to pry. Instead, she asked about the books stacked on shelves behind the desk. They spent the morning going through the school's meager supplies. Kieran proved surprisingly knowledgeable about the community, telling her which families had been there longest, which children might need extra attention. "You seem to know everyone," Rebecca observed as they walked back toward town. Kieran shrugged. "Been in these parts 10 years, you get to know folks." He paused, then added, "I should head back to the ranch tomorrow. Boss is expecting a report." Rebecca felt a pang of disappointment. "Of course. You've already done far more than necessary." He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "Wasn't necessary that makes me want to help you, Rebecca." The way he said her name made her heart flutter strangely. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the mayor calling Kieran's name. The moment passed, but Rebecca carried his words with her through the day. That evening, she was surprised when Kieran appeared at the hotel dining room, dressed in what was clearly his best shirt, his hair still damp from washing. "Miss Mills," he said formally, "would you do me the honor of joining me for dinner? Sort of a proper welcome to Sweetwater." Rebecca accepted, ignoring the curious glances from other diners. Over a meal far better than she expected in a frontier town, they talked of books they'd read, places they'd seen. Kieran, she discovered, had educated himself extensively despite limited formal schooling. He spoke of Mark Twain and Walt Whitman with genuine appreciation and listened intently to her thoughts on Emerson and Thoreau. "Never would have guessed a cowboy would be so well-read," she teased gently. "Long nights on the trail," he explained. "Man needs something to occupy his mind besides cattle and the weather." As the evening drew to a close, Kieran walked her to the foot of the hotel stairs. "I'll be heading out at dawn," he said. "Probably won't be back in town for a few weeks." Rebecca felt a surprising weight of sadness at his words. "I understand, you have responsibilities. But I'd like to call on you when I return," he continued, his eyes searching hers, "if that would be acceptable." "Very acceptable," she replied softly. He nodded, seeming pleased. "I'll be thinking about you, Rebecca Mills, and you, Kieran Vance." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. "Almost forgot, got something for you." From his pocket, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For when you start teaching." Rebecca unwrapped it to find a beautiful fountain pen, its barrel inlaid with mother of pearl. "Ordered it from back east months ago," he explained, looking almost embarrassed. "Thought I might learn to write proper letters, but seems more fitting for a teacher." The gift touched her deeply. "It's beautiful, Kieran, thank you." He nodded once more and left, his tall figure silhouetted against the evening light. Rebecca watched him go, the pen clutched in her hand, wondering at the strange turns of fate that had brought her to this place, to this man. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Rebecca threw herself into preparing for the school term, organizing books and supplies, visiting families to introduce herself. Sweetwater embraced her warmly, though she occasionally caught whispers about the schoolteacher and the cowboy. It seemed her rescue and subsequent dinner with Kieran had become minor town gossip. On the first day of school, 27 children of varying ages filed into the schoolhouse, eyeing their new teacher with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Rebecca greeted each by name, having memorized the town's school register. By day's end, she was exhausted but exhilarated. These children were hungry for knowledge, even those who pretended indifference. The days fell into a rhythm. Rebecca taught during the week, took Sunday dinners with the mayor's family, and gradually made friends among the town's women. Yet she found herself watching the road leading north, hoping for a glimpse of a tall figure on a black horse. 3 weeks after her arrival, that vigilance was rewarded. Rebecca was dismissing her students for the day when she noticed Shadow tied outside the schoolhouse. Her heart leapt and she hurried the children along, ignoring their knowing glances. Kieran stood as she stepped outside, removing his hat. "Miss Mills." "Mr. Vance," she replied formally, aware of the children watching. "What brings you to town?" "Business with the mayor," he said, then added more quietly, "and a promise to call on a certain schoolteacher." That evening they walked together along the creek that ran behind the town, talking of all that had happened in his absence. Kieran told her of the cattle drive being planned for fall, the new foals born at the ranch, the political maneuverings of neighboring ranchers. Rebecca shared stories of her students, the progress they were making, the challenges she faced. "You love it," he observed. "Teaching. It shows in your face when you talk about those kids." Rebecca smiled. "I do, even Tommy Weaver, who put a snake in my desk last week." Kieran laughed. "That boy's been trouble since he could walk, but he's smart, just needs someone to believe in him. Like someone believed in you." She asked gently. He looked at her sharply, then his expression softened. "Yeah, had a teacher myself when I was 10, Mrs. Callaghan, first person who ever told me I could be more than just another cowhand." The admission seemed to cost him something, and Rebecca felt honored by his trust. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "It's beautiful here," Rebecca said softly. "Different from the east, but beautiful in its own way." Kieran nodded. "Took me a while to see it. When I first came west, all I saw was the harshness, the danger. Took years to notice the beauty. And now," he looked at her, his blue eyes intense in the fading light, "now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Over the following months, Kieran found reasons to come to town with increasing frequency. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a book of poetry, wildflowers picked along the trail, once a magnificent eagle feather he'd found. Rebecca treasured each one, keeping them in a special box in her room at the boarding house where she'd moved after her first month. Their friendship deepened through long conversations and shared experiences. Rebecca met Mr. Sullivan, the ranch owner, when Kieran brought her to Sunday dinner at the Lazy S. The old rancher took an immediate liking to her, declaring her just what this territory needs: beauty with brains and backbone. For his part, Kieran attended the school's Christmas pageant, sitting uncomfortably among the parents but beaming with pride when Rebecca's students performed flawlessly. Afterwards, he presented her with a small leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with her initials. "For your thoughts," he said simply. As winter settled over Wyoming, bringing bitter cold and deep snow, Rebecca found herself drawn more and more to the quiet cowboy. There was something about Kieran Vance, a steadiness, an integrity that called to her. Yet he maintained a certain reserve, never pushing their relationship beyond friendship, though his eyes sometimes told a different story. It was Martha from the hotel who finally enlightened Rebecca one snowy afternoon in January as they worked together on quilts for the church charity. "That Kieran Vance is sweet on you, plain as day," the older woman remarked, stitching calmly. "Has been since he brought you to town." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "We're friends," Martha snorted softly. "Friends don't ride 40 miles in a blizzard just to make sure a lady has enough firewood like he did last week." "He was concerned for my safety," Rebecca protested. "Hum." Martha's expression was knowing. "And I suppose the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching is just friendly concern too." Rebecca couldn't deny the flutter of hope those words caused. "If he does have feelings beyond friendship, he hasn't expressed them." Martha tied off her thread and reached for another piece of fabric. "Men like Kieran Vance don't express much of anything unless they're dead certain. Been hurt before, that one." "Hurt? How?" Martha hesitated. "Not my place to tell tales, but since you're new." "There was a woman about 5 years back. City girl from Denver came to visit her uncle's ranch. Set her cap for Kieran. He was already making a name for himself, handsome as sin and good with cattle. Led him on something fierce, had him believing she'd stay. Then her rich father showed up and she left without so much as a goodbye." "That's terrible," Rebecca said softly, thinking of Kieran's reserved manner, his careful distance. "Broke something in him, threw himself into work after that, rarely came to town except on business." Martha gave Rebecca a pointed look. "Until you arrived." The conversation stayed with Rebecca through the winter months. She watched Kieran more carefully during his visits, noting the way his expression softened when they were alone, how his hand sometimes moved toward hers before pulling back. If Martha was right, he was fighting his feelings, but why? The answer came unexpectedly in early March. A late blizzard had closed the school, and Rebecca was using the time to catch up on grading papers in her small rented room. A knock at her door revealed Kieran, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. "Kieran, what are you doing out in this weather?" He stomped snow from his boots before entering. "Brought mail from the ranch. Stage couldn't get through, but I had business in town anyway." Rebecca took the letters. He offered correspondence from her former colleagues in Boston and invited him to warm himself by her fire. As he removed his coat, she noticed a parchment envelope protruding from his shirt pocket. "Important business?" she asked, gesturing to the letter. A shadow crossed his face. "Land deed, bought a small spread just north of town, been saving for years." Rebecca's heart leapt. "Your own ranch, Kieran, that's wonderful news," he nodded but seemed hesitant. "It's not much, 160 acres, good water, decent grazing. Previous owner couldn't make a go of it, but you can," she finished confidently. "You know this land better than anyone." "That's just it," he said, pacing her small sitting room. "I know how hard it is, how unforgiving. It's no life for—" He stopped abruptly. "For what?" She pressed gently. Kieran turned to face her, something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "For a woman used to city comforts, for children who deserve more than isolation and struggle." Rebecca's breath caught as understanding dawned. "You're not just talking about any woman and children, are you?" He held her gaze, and in that moment all his careful reserve fell away. "No, Rebecca, I'm not." She moved toward him slowly. "Perhaps you should ask this woman what kind of life she wants instead of deciding for her." "And what would you want, Rebecca Mills?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She stopped directly before him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "A life with purpose, with meaning, with—" She faltered, then gathered her courage. "With love." Something like hope flickered in his eyes. "Even if it means hardship, isolation, giving up the comforts you're used to." "I left those comforts behind when I came west," she reminded him. "And I haven't regretted it for a moment." Kieran's hand rose to touch her cheek, so gently it almost broke her heart. "I've wanted to court you properly since the day I found you by that empty fire," he admitted, "but I had nothing to offer, no land, no home of my own." "You had yourself," Rebecca said softly. "That would have been enough." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "I made a vow that night when you were sleeping, promised myself I'd make something of myself before I dared to ask for your heart." Rebecca placed her hand over his. And now, instead of answering, Kieran lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost reverent, but deepened as Rebecca responded, her arms sliding around his neck. Years of longing and months of growing affection culminated in that kiss, leaving them both breathless when they finally parted. "I love you, Rebecca Mills," Kieran said, his forehead resting against hers. "Have since the beginning, I think." "And I love you," she replied, the words feeling like coming home. "Though you are the most stubborn man I've ever met, waiting all this time," he laughed softly. "Wanted to do right by you, still do." He stepped back slightly, taking her hands in his. "I can't offer you luxury or an easy life. The ranch will take years of hard work to build, but I can promise you this: I'll love you every day of my life. I'll work until my hands bleed to give you a good home. And I'll never take for granted the gift of your love." Tears pricked Rebecca's eyes at the simple sincerity of his words. "That's all I could ever want." Kieran's courtship became the talk of Sweetwater. Though they had effectively been courting for months, now it was official, with Kieran calling at her boarding house each Sunday, taking her on proper buggy rides, and escorting her to town socials. Rebecca bloomed under his attention, her natural vivacity complementing his quieter nature. Spring brought new beginnings. Kieran split his time between the Lazy S and his own small ranch, building a modest but sturdy two-room cabin with the help of friends from town. Rebecca continued teaching, but spent her weekends riding out with Kieran to the ranch, helping plan gardens and discussing their future together. They were married in early June, with the whole town turning out for the celebration. Mr. Sullivan gave the bride away, declaring it about time Kieran Vance found himself a woman smart enough to match him. The schoolchildren formed an honor guard, tossing wildflower petals as Rebecca and Kieran emerged from the church. Their wedding night was spent at the ranch that would now be their home. Kieran carried Rebecca across the threshold of the cabin, now furnished with a mix of his practical pieces and a few treasures she'd brought from the east. A proper bed with a handmade quilt dominated the bedroom, while the main room held a table, chairs, and a small bookshelf already filled with their combined collection. "It's perfect," Rebecca said, turning slowly to take it all in. "Absolutely perfect." Kieran watched her, his expression a mix of pride and lingering disbelief that this remarkable woman was now his wife. "It's small," he said, "but we can add on as needed." Rebecca moved to him, sliding her arms around his waist. "For children, you mean?" He nodded, his hands settling at her waist. "If you want them." "I do," she said simply. "Children who will learn to see the beauty in this land just as their father does." Later, as moonlight spilled through the cabin's single window, Kieran held Rebecca close, her head pillowed on his chest. "That night I found you," he murmured. "You looked like something from a dream, sleeping beside that cold fire. Never thought I'd be lucky enough to hold you like this." Rebecca pressed a kiss to his skin. "Not luck," she corrected. "Fate," he smiled against her hair. "Maybe so. All I know is that covering you with my coat was the best decision I ever made." "And your vows," she teased gently. Kieran rolled to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Those two, every single one. I promised I'd keep you safe, make you happy, love you always, and I will, Rebecca. Until my dying day." Rebecca traced the lines of his face, memorizing every detail. "I believe you, and I promise the same." The years that followed proved the strength of those vows. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily under Kieran's careful management. Rebecca continued teaching for 2 more years, riding to town each day until the arrival of their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, made the journey impractical. By the time their son James was born 2 years later, the cabin had expanded to include a proper kitchen and another bedroom. Kieran's small herd had tripled in size, and he'd hired 2 young cowboys to help with the increasing work. Rebecca found unexpected fulfillment in ranch life. She kept a large garden, learned to make cheese and butter from their milk cows, and started a small orchard that promised future abundance. In the evenings, she taught their children and the cowboys' children too, creating a small school in their home during the winter months when travel to town was difficult. Their happiness wasn't without challenges. Drought threatened their livelihood one summer, and a particularly harsh winter claimed half their herd another year. Rebecca fell ill after James's birth, causing Kieran weeks of fear before she recovered. But through each trial, their love deepened, their partnership strengthened. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Kieran surprised Rebecca with a special gift, a proper piano for their now spacious main room. He'd secretly arranged for it to be shipped from Denver, a monumental expense and logistical challenge. "How?" Rebecca gasped, running her fingers reverently over the polished wood. "Been saving," he said simply. "Remembered you saying how you missed music." She played that evening, filling their home with melodies she'd feared she'd forgotten. Kieran sat with Elizabeth on his lap and James leaning against his knee, his expression one of perfect contentment as he watched his wife's hands dance across the keys. Later, after the children were asleep, Rebecca found him on the porch, looking out at the land that had become their kingdom. "Happy?" he asked as she settled beside him on the bench he'd built. "Completely," she assured him, leaning against his solid warmth. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted." Kieran's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Funny how life works. If you hadn't been on that stagecoach at that exact moment, if you hadn't decided to ride that particular trail that night," he chuckled. "If you hadn't fallen asleep beside an empty fire," Rebecca turned her face up to his. "If you hadn't covered me with your coat and your vows, then I wouldn't be the happiest man in Wyoming Territory," he finished, bending to kiss her softly. As stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky, Rebecca thought of the journey that had brought them here from a chance encounter in the wilderness to this rich, full life they'd built together. It hadn't been the life she'd imagined when she left Boston, but it was infinitely better, wilder, harder, more beautiful. And at the center of it all was Kieran Vance, the cowboy who had once covered her with his coat on a cold night, and every day since had covered her with his love. 10 years into their marriage, the Vance Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county. Their cabin had evolved into a proper house with glass windows, painted clapboard siding, and enough bedrooms for their now 4 children: Elizabeth, James, and twin girls, Sarah and Mary, who had arrived unexpectedly in their 7th year of marriage. Kieran, at 40, had mellowed somewhat, though he still worked alongside his men from dawn till dusk most days. His dark hair now showed touches of silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but Rebecca found him more handsome than ever. Success had not changed his essential nature. He remained steady, thoughtful, and deeply devoted to his family. Rebecca, at 35, had blossomed in her role as ranch wife and mother. Her hands, once soft from city living, now bore the honorable marks of labor, though she still maintained her love of books and music, teaching all her children to play the piano and appreciate literature. She had become a respected figure in the community, often called upon for advice or assistance when illness or trouble struck neighboring homesteads. On the anniversary of the day, Kieran had found her beside the empty fire, a date they always commemorated. He surprised her by declaring a holiday from work. Leaving the ranch in the capable hands of their foreman, a young man Kieran had mentored much as Mr. Sullivan had once mentored him. He packed a picnic and took Rebecca riding to a special place in the hills overlooking their land. "Remember the first time I brought you here?" he asked as they spread a blanket beneath a towering pine. Rebecca smiled, unpacking the food they'd brought. "Our first anniversary, you were so proud to show me how much the herd had grown." "And now look," he said, gesturing to the valley below where their cattle grazed on rich grassland, their house visible in the distance, smoke curling from the chimney where their housekeeper would be preparing dinner for the children. "We've been blessed," Rebecca agreed, handing him a slice of the apple pie she'd baked that morning. Kieran ate appreciatively, then stretched out on the blanket, his hat tipped over his eyes against the autumn sun. "Never thought I'd have all this. The land, the cattle, the respect of other ranchers, but most of all, you and the children." Rebecca lay beside him, her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I think about that night, how close I came to." She couldn't finish the thought. Even now, Kieran's arm tightened around her. "But I found you. That's what matters." "Why did you stop there?" she asked, a question she'd wondered about for years. "That particular spot that night." He was silent for a moment. "Truth, not sure, was heading a different direction entirely. Something just pulled me that way, like I was meant to find you." The simple admission touched Rebecca deeply. She turned to kiss him, a gesture that even after a decade of marriage still kindled the same flame between them. Later, as they rode home in the golden light of late afternoon, Kieran said casually, "Got a letter from Mr. Sullivan yesterday." "Oh. How is he enjoying his retirement in California?" The old rancher had sold the Lazy S 2 years earlier to Kieran's great regret. "Says it's too damn civilized," Kieran chuckled. "But that's not the interesting part. He's offering to sell us the north section of his old property. Says he kept it separate from the Lazy S sale and now he has no use for it." Rebecca's eyes widened. "That's prime grazing land, and it borders our property, doesn't it?" Kieran nodded, watching her reaction carefully. "Would mean more work, more responsibility, more hands to manage. But also more opportunity for the children when they're grown," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "Elizabeth already shows such a talent with horses, and James loves working with you. The twins might prefer town life when they're older," Kieran mused. "They've got your brains," Rebecca laughed. "They've got your stubbornness, that's certain." She considered the prospect seriously. "Can we afford it?" Sullivan's offering fair terms. Says he'd rather see the land go to someone who'll care for it properly. Kieran guided Shadow, now an elderly but still dignified horse, around a rocky outcropping. "I wanted your opinion before deciding." The fact that he naturally included her in such decisions was one of the many reasons Rebecca loved him so deeply. "I think we should do it," she said decisively. "We've never shied away from hard work, and it's an investment in our children's future." Kieran smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "That's what I thought you'd say." They crested the final hill before their ranch, and Rebecca caught her breath at the sight below. The setting sun gilded everything in gold: their house with its wide porch where the children would be watching for them, the barn and outbuildings they'd added over the years, the corral where young colts frolicked. It was a vision of everything they'd built together, everything they'd fought for. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Kieran reined Shadow to a stop, taking a moment to appreciate the view with her. "Worth every hardship," he agreed, then with a sidelong glance at his wife. "Still don't regret trading Boston for all this." Rebecca turned to him, her eyes reflecting the golden light. "Not for a single moment. Everything I've ever wanted is right here." As they rode down toward home, greeted by the excited shouts of their children running to meet them, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place, this life, this love. From a cold night beside an empty fire to the warm heart of a family and home she'd helped create, it was more than she could have dreamed, and exactly where she was meant to be. That night, after the children were asleep, Rebecca found Kieran on the porch, a habit he'd maintained through the years. She brought him coffee and settled beside him on the swing he'd built when she was expecting the twins. "I've been thinking," she said, watching the stars emerge in the clear Wyoming sky. "Dangerous," he teased, his hand finding hers automatically, "about our anniversary gift to each other." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "Thought we agreed the Sullivan land was gift enough this year." "It is, but I was thinking of something else, something to mark 15 years since you found me." She turned to face him. "What if we renew our vows here at the ranch with the children and our friends? A celebration of everything we've built together." Kieran considered this, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Might be nice," he finally said in his understated way, then with a hint of mischief, "Do I get to cover you with my coat again?" Rebecca laughed, the sound carrying into the night. "If you wish, though I hope I won't be found sleeping beside an empty fire this time." "No," he said softly, pulling her closer. "Never again if I have anything to say about it." 3 months later, on the anniversary of their first meeting, friends and neighbors gathered at the Vance ranch for the vow renewal ceremony. The house and yard had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, tables set up beneath the cottonwood trees for the feast that would follow. Elizabeth, now 12, and growing into a beauty with her father's blue eyes and her mother's grace, helped her younger siblings prepare for the ceremony. James, sturdy and serious at 10, took his role as ring-bearer with solemn importance, while the 8-year-old twins flitted about in matching blue dresses, scattering flower petals everywhere. Rebecca wore a new dress of deep blue silk, an extravagance Kieran had insisted upon, ordering it specially from Denver. As she prepared in their bedroom, Martha from the hotel, now retired but still a dear friend, helped with her hair. "Never seen a love like yours and Kieran's," the older woman remarked, pinning up a curl. "Like something from a storybook, the way you two found each other." Rebecca smiled at her reflection. "Not always a fairy tale, we've had our struggles." "Course you have," Martha snorted. "That's real love, standing together through the hard times, not just the pretty ones." A knock at the door revealed Elizabeth, her expression a mix of excitement and the new seriousness that had recently appeared as she approached young womanhood. "Pa's ready," she announced. "And he looks so handsome in his new suit." "Then I shouldn't keep him waiting," Rebecca said, rising from her dressing table. The ceremony took place in the front yard, beneath an arch Kieran and James had constructed, and the girls had decorated with roses from Rebecca's garden. Mr. Sullivan had made the journey from California to attend, insisting on standing beside Kieran as his best man, while Martha served as Rebecca's matron of honor. When Rebecca appeared on the porch, Kieran's face lit with the same wonder and love she'd seen the day they married. He watched her approach, their children flanking her, with an expression that told her everything she needed to know about his feelings, even after 15 years. The minister from Sweetwater led them through their vows, the same promises they'd made before, but deepened now by years of living them out day by day. When it came time to exchange rings, James stepped forward proudly, carrying the simple gold bands on a small cushion Elizabeth had embroidered. "I've loved you since the moment I found you," Kieran said as he slipped the ring onto Rebecca's finger. "Through every season, every struggle, every joy, I vow to love you for all the seasons to come, to stand with you through whatever life brings, to cherish the family we've created together." Rebecca blinked back tears as she placed his ring. "You covered me with your coat when I was cold, with your protection when I was vulnerable, with your love when I was alone. I vow to continue our journey together with the same courage and devotion you've always shown, to love you through all the years ahead, to honor the life we've built from that first fateful meeting. After the ceremony, as guests enjoyed the wedding feast, Kieran pulled Rebecca aside, leading her to a quiet spot beneath their favorite oak tree. "Got something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in silk. Rebecca unwrapped it carefully to find a locket of gold, beautifully etched with their intertwined initials. Inside were miniature portraits of their 4 children, painted by an artist who had visited Sweetwater the previous spring. "Oh, Kieran," she breathed, touching the exquisite gift. "It's perfect." He fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering against her skin. "Wanted you to have something to keep them close, even when they start making their own ways in the world." The thought of their children eventually leaving brought a bittersweet pang. Elizabeth already showed signs of the independent spirit that would someday take her beyond the ranch boundaries. James would likely stay and work the land he already loved, but the twins, they were still young enough that their futures remained unwritten. "They'll always come home," Rebecca said with certainty. "Because you've made this place the center of their world, just as you did for me." Kieran shook his head. "We did that, together." From the yard came the sounds of music and laughter. Their foreman had brought out his fiddle, and dancing had begun on the packed earth in front of the barn. They watched as Elizabeth was shyly asked to dance by the blacksmith's son. James tried to escape the attention of the twin daughters of a neighboring rancher, and the twins whirled each other in dizzying circles. "Should we join them?" Rebecca asked, leaning into her husband's solid warmth. "In a minute," Kieran said, his arm tightening around her waist. "Just want to remember this moment. You and me, 15 years from that night, with everything we dreamed of right in front of us." Rebecca turned in his arms to face him, and many more years to come. "Many more," he agreed, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he'd shown that first time in her boarding house room. "That's a vow I intend to keep." As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across their land, Kieran finally led Rebecca to join the dancing. Their friends and neighbors made way, applauding as the couple took the center of the impromptu dance floor. Kieran had never been much of a dancer, but for Rebecca he'd learned, just as he'd learned to appreciate poetry and music for her sake. They moved together in perfect harmony, the result of 15 years of learning each other's rhythms, anticipating each other's movements. To those watching, they seemed to communicate without words, their bodies remembering a dance begun long ago beside an empty fire, when a cowboy covered a sleeping woman with his coat and made silent vows that would shape their destiny. The celebration continued into the night, with lanterns hung from tree branches creating pools of golden light. Eventually, the younger children grew tired, and Rebecca saw the twins curled up asleep on a bench, leaning against each other as they so often did. James sat with Mr. Sullivan and other ranch hands, listening wide-eyed to tales of the early days of Wyoming Territory, while Elizabeth had disappeared with several other young girls, their whispers and giggles occasionally drifting from the direction of the garden. As the hour grew late, guests began to depart, clasping Kieran's hand and kissing Rebecca's cheek, offering congratulations and blessings for many more years together. Finally, only family remained: the children, Mr. Sullivan, who would stay in the guest room, and Martha, who had become like a grandmother to the Vance children. Kieran found Rebecca on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. Without a word, he draped his coat around her shoulders, just as he had done that first night. She smiled, recognizing the gesture for the symbol it had become between them. "Cold?" he asked, though the summer night was mild. "No," she said, leaning back against him as his arms encircled her. "Just remembering. Good memories, I hope." Rebecca nodded. "The best, though if you'd told me that night what the next 15 years would bring, I might not have believed it." "Might not have believed it myself," Kieran admitted. "Never thought I deserved this kind of happiness." She turned in his arms. "You deserve every bit of it. You've worked for it, fought for it, built it with these hands." She took his hands in hers, studying them: strong, calloused, capable hands that had tended cattle and horses, built their home, cradled their newborn children, and always reached for hers when she needed strength. From inside came the sound of Martha shooing the children to bed, Mr. Sullivan's deep laugh as one of the twins undoubtedly tried to negotiate a later bedtime. Their home was full of life, of love, of the family they'd created together. What do you think the next 15 years will bring? Rebecca asked, content in the circle of her husband's arms. Kieran considered this seriously, as was his way. Elizabeth will have suitors I'll need to intimidate. James will take on more responsibility with the ranch. The twins will continue to run us ragged. His expression softened. But we'll face it all together, just like we have everything else. Together, Rebecca agreed. It was the word that defined them, that had carried them through drought and blizzard, through childbirth and illness, through the 1,000 daily challenges of carving a life from this beautiful, demanding land. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms and the quiet of the Wyoming night, Rebecca thought again of the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A stagecoach robbery, a bullet's graze, an empty fire, a cowboy's kindness, a coat and vows that had shaped a lifetime. "I love you, Kieran Vance," she said softly, the words no less true for having been said countless times before. "And I love you, Rebecca Vance," he replied, his voice holding the same certainty it had 15 years ago when he'd first covered her with his coat, and his heart with unspoken vows that had lasted a lifetime.